Dubbed as a spiritual successor to Returnal, Saros very much adopts many of the elements that make up that game's identity. These range from gameplay, enemy attack patterns, the ability to constantly die and respawn, as well as much more. But what about the Platinum Trophy? When I platinumed Returnal, it took a good game and turned it into a massive slog due to the RNG elements involved, with some of the collectibles taking hours to appear due to the random nature of it all. If I had to give the game a rating, it would be an 8 out of 10 for just beating the game, and a 2 out of 10 for getting the Platinum Trophy. Saros also being a roguelike, I started my Platinum journey with reservations. While I figured that I would enjoy the game at first, my playthrough of Returnal lingered in the back of my mind, but I'll figure how much I actually need to do in order to Platinum Saros. Saros has 45 trophies including the Platinum. The good news is that none of the trophies are missable, meaning that I can approach this game at my own pace. The Platinum journey can be divided into 2 phases. The first one is just the standard first playthrough, focused on just beating the game while likely popping some of the trophies along the way. The second part is the cleanup phase, where I'll be chasing any trophies that I missed the first time around. And to my surprise, there weren't any trophies related to the collectibles. Instead, most of the miscellaneous trophies were connected to various gameplay requirements. I did breathe a sigh of relief at this. However, a few of those gameplay trophies were still challenging, or at the very least tedious. So join me as I chase the Platinum Trophy for Saros. This is a fairly recent game, so I'll try to keep story spoilers to a minimum, but there will be visual spoilers. You have been warned. We start the game by taking control of the game's main character Arjun, as we're thrown into an opening tutorial section. Here, we learn the basics of the controls before we fight a boss called Consort. I think this is a boss that was supposed to lose to, as I managed to get rid of half of her health before she killed me. Dying for the first time pops a trophy, and the Platinum journey officially begins. We then respawn in the base camp, which acts as the game's hub area. We talk to the various characters and gather what information we can before we set off to exploring Carcosa. The different sections of the game are called biomes that we'll be able to fast travel to once we beat them, but for now I started off with the first one, Shattered Rise. Early into the run, I unlocked 2 gameplay trophies, one for defeating a shielded hostile in midair, and another for landing 50 consecutive shots with the rifle. I spent more time diving further into the biome before I unlocked the Eclipse for this area, which makes the enemies a lot more dangerous, but it is necessary in order to encounter the boss of the area. This is the case for the rest of the biomes too. Eventually, I did make it to the first boss of the game called Prophet, and I have to be honest, I'm a bit conflicted on the bosses. Most of them have multiple health bars and can be tanky even with upgraded weapons, but they can provide an interesting challenge to you once you get into the swing of things. Anyway, after a few goes, I eventually defeated Prophet after taking out some plants next to him that exposed his weak point. As a result, I obtained a trophy for just beating him. I returned to the base camp where I talked to everyone and advanced the story. I was also collecting various text and audio logs which contain key information from characters that give you additional context about the story. It's here where I also find the main computer primary. Here we can purchase various upgrades for Arjun as well as where fast travel is used. Once I was done here, I headed to the next area, the Ancient Depths. It's here that I popped another trophy for using the Second Chance ability. This is where we can revive ourselves if we die during one of our runs, but can normally only be used once in a single run. As you go through each biome, you'll be able to unlock a variety of different weapons and abilities that you can permanently use going forward. One of them was the Dispiritor, and shortly after unlocking it, I obtained a trophy for damaging 5 hostiles simultaneously with it. Another useful ability to mention is the shield. With it, I can block or even absorb certain projectiles. In the Ancient Depths, I used it to absorb 2021 projectiles, which unlocked another trophy. I also used the shield to absorb 3 power bars and then used them to defeat an enemy, which also popped another trophy. If I'm being honest, most of the gameplay trophies are related to the various weapons you use and discover throughout the game. As long as you pick up and use them enough times, you can get the most of the gameplay trophies that way. This was the case with the Prominence, where I was able to defeat 5 hostiles with a single blast. As well as damaging 7 hostiles in 5 seconds using the hand cannons. Eventually, I ran into the overlord of the area, Bastion. It took a few tries, but I was able to beat him. Like Prophet, he's stationary, and you need to defeat a few smaller enemies before he becomes vulnerable. Beating him unlocked another story trophy. If you've been watching the gameplay footage all this time, you'll notice that the enemies all attack in certain ways. More specifically, all of their attacks are color-coded. These colors affect the way you can deal with them. Blue ones can be absorbed to charge power attacks. Yellow ones can also be absorbed, but it will cause corruption, which lowers your health. And red ones must be avoided or parried. The combat is all about pattern recognition and how you deal with said patterns. These will be relevant for a few trophies, but I'll get to those later. Back at the base area, we enter what is known as the Banyan tree for the first time to access one of Arjun's memories. Doing this pops another trophy. It's here we learn more about Arjun's relationship with his estranged wife Nitya, and what led to them parting ways. In fact, Arjun's core motive for this mission is finding Nitya, who was on a previous expedition here before she went missing. Back to the main game, and we enter the third biome, Shattered Descent. Not much trophy-wise happens here, but we did encounter a Nightmare Strand for the first time. These are short but hard mini-levels, and beating them grants a few rewards, including a new second chance if you've already used it once. There are 7 total throughout the game, and we'll need to defeat all of them at least once for a trophy. I make it to the end of the Shattered Descent, where I fought the next boss. This one was easier because he has only 1 health bar, and I was able to beat him on the first try, which popped another trophy. With each biome that I progress through, the story advances as well. It's clear that the mental state of the rest of the crew is deteriorating as tensions build towards the end goal. I enter the next biome, the Blighted Marsh. This one did give me a bit of a hard time due to all the poison involved, but on the bright side, there were some cool new weapons to play with. One of them was the crossbow, where I managed to hit 3 hostiles at once with it to unlock a trophy. I also finally unlocked the ability to parry, which was very useful in dealing with the red projectiles some enemies love to spam. And not long after unlocking it, I popped another trophy for staggering 2 hostiles simultaneously with 1 parry. At this point in the game, I had died and respawned enough times that I had defeated a lot of enemies. So many in fact that the game reminded me of this by giving me a trophy for defeating a total of 1,995 enemies. The point of going through the Blighted Marsh was to reach bridge controls that would allow us to reach a nearby area. These controls were guarded by another overlord called Legion. The thing I dreaded about the bosses weren't the fights themselves, but the run back after you die. Like Returnal, if you die in Saros, you start again in the base camp and must make your way through the entire biome before taking on the boss. In some cases, this can take at least half an hour, which was getting more annoying as the deaths piled up. I know this is a common theme for roguelikes, but it's not nice, especially if you get to a point where it feels like you're not making any progress with each run. Eventually, after a few hours of trying, I was able to beat Legion and obtain another trophy. He's not even that difficult of a boss, but I struggled more against him for some reason, despite getting his attack patterns down quite early on. Anyway, now that the bridge was up, we moved on to the next area called the Desecrated Fortress. While ascending the fortress, I popped another trophy for defeating a hostile using a Ricochet Nova Lance slug. I don't even know how I did it, but I'll take it. One thing I do appreciate about this game is the level of detail involved in the art direction, especially when it comes to the architecture. I really like these designs, and I think they're more memorable than anything I saw in Returnal. Art direction can go a long way in making a game's atmosphere more immersive. Eventually, I made it to the top, where I fought this bird-like creature named Architect. This fight was a bit tough, but I did beat it on my first go, which is always nice, and I popped a trophy for doing so. When I make it back to the base camp, a cutscene plays out where most of the crew have lost their minds, resulting in some deaths. This marks the end of Act 1 and another trophy pops too. Despite what happened, Arjun is still determined to find his wife, so regardless of Kayla's mental state, he carries on. In Act 2, a new area is unlocked called Acolyte's Haven. It's here where we begin to see some interesting developments in the story, as well as some new weapons. One of which was the chakram, which I personally found quite useful, but results may vary for you. It worked for me as I popped another gameplay trophy for using the chakram to damage 4 hostiles in 2 seconds. Eventually, I made it to the Overlord Shepherd, this kraken-like creature. I died to him the first time, but unlocked a trophy along the way for dying 3 times in a single cycle. This happened because I had already used my second chance once earlier in the biome, before gaining it back by completing a Nightmare Strand before dying again twice more to Shepherd. 20 minutes later, I fought Shepherd again, and this time I defeated him to obtain another trophy. The next area would end up being the penultimate one in the game, and it's called the Cathedral. Once again, we discover some interesting story moments regarding Nietzsche before we progress through the area. It's here where I got another trophy for damaging 3 hostiles simultaneously with the Illumine, which is one of my personal favourite weapons in the game. While in the Cathedral, I found what would be my 70th piece of Halcyon, which is a resource that could be used for permanent upgrades to Arjun. Doing this unlocked another trophy. About an hour later, I defeated an alpha hostile. These are just enemies that happen to have more health and power than your regular enemies in the game. Since that was around the 10th one I had defeated, I obtained another trophy along the way. Throughout the game, you'll see these different coloured blocks. These contain various weapons, resources and upgrades that you can use for the run you're currently on. These include weapon varieties, and without thinking about it, I managed to get a trophy for unlocking and utilising all traits of a weapon. Like I said, a lot of these gameplay trophies you'll do naturally if you're not afraid to mix and match certain elements. I did finally make it to the boss of the Cathedral, Priestess, after also witnessing some key story moments as well. This is a multi-phase fight where she'll split into 3 and you have to dodge all of their attacks while taking down the shield so you can do damage. After failing the first time, I was able to beat her on my second go, also popping a trophy along the way. Afterwards, some revelations are revealed about Arjun and Nitya's relationship and the truth about her motives. After an intense cutscene, we're once again brought back to the base camp and a trophy pops for completing Act 2. Story-wise, all that was left was to find Nietzsche and defeat the final boss, but it wouldn't be as easy as it sounds. There was one biome left in the form of the Yellow Shore, which is what the game had been building up to at this point. For me, this was the hardest area in the game, and it felt like I'd hit a wall a couple of times, especially when the game produced bosses and obstacles for particular areas, even in small zones. The number of enemies were also going way over the top as well, to the point where I was a little overwhelmed. This was also where the game's lack of enemy variety was the clearest. Most of the areas often produced the same enemies with slight variances, but a lot of them had the same attack patterns, so it wasn't as challenging. As a result, it feels like the developers decided just to put in loads in the final area to give some semblance of a challenge. However, it just becomes infuriating after a while. I knew these zones were beatable, but it bordered on unfair with the amount of enemies. Since I was constantly dying and returning to the Yellow Shore a lot, I popped another trophy for collecting 20 health upgrades in total. Here I would also obtain a trophy for finding all of the weapons and defeating 25 hostiles with each of them. The game doesn't track individual weapons, but it does track the overall total. So all you have to do is keep rotating the weapons you use and see if the total counter goes up, and eventually the trophy will be yours. After a while, I had spent so much time in the Yellow Shore that I actually found 20 Halcyon in just doing that biome, which actually popped another trophy for doing so. I would eventually make it to the end, and the final boss of both the biome and the game in the form of the King. In my opinion, he was the hardest boss in the game. I died a lot to him, even after understanding his attack patterns. However, I was determined to finish this and kept powering on despite my difficulties. I defeated the king and earned my rightful trophy. Afterwards, I saw the end cutscene, which was pretty cool in all honesty, and saw the credits roll. At the end of it all, I also got a trophy for finishing Act 3. Now that I had finished the main game, it was time for the usual cleanup on a platinum journey. Or so I thought. Turns out even though I rolled credits, there was actually an epilogue with particular requirements. This would involve going to certain areas and interacting with various characters who were still alive before taking on the final boss again. However, before all of that, I entered the banyan tree for the final time to see the final memory. There were 4 memories I needed to see to give better context to the story. And viewing the final one pops a trophy for witnessing all the encounters inside the banyan tree. It was now time to go to different biomes and fulfill the remaining criteria for the true ending. I also noticed that I only had 1 trophy left related to a weapon, that being the shotgun, where I needed to land 7 in a row with 100% accuracy. This one was probably the toughest to attain because of the nature of the fast-paced game, like Saros, and the intricacy required. If you want to get 100% accuracy, you need to get up close to the enemy so none of the pellets go astray. After some trial and error, I was able to accomplish this and pop a trophy for doing so. I eventually fulfilled all the necessary conditions in the epilogue and went back to the Yellow Shore to take on the king again. I was able to beat him relatively comfortably this time, however instead of killing him, I just needed to go through the gate at the end instead. Doing this shows us an alternative ending, which is the true ending, and I rolled credits once again. At this point I had 7 trophies remaining, so I was hoping that the rest of the cleanup wouldn't take too long. However, I had also been ignoring 1 trophy which would have saved me some time if I didn't do that. That being the Carcosan Cartographer trophy, where I needed to complete 33 runs with at least 1 modifier enabled. Modifiers are certain features you can access in the base camp to make your playthrough easier or harder. I had been ignoring this as I wanted to beat the game normally, but I realised later that would cost me some time. The 33 is, of course, an homage to Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I figured this would be one of the last trophies I would get, so I enabled one of the modifiers and got to work on the other trophies. The next trophy I went for was for beating all of the Nightmare Strands at least once. Based on my previous playthrough, I remember that the missing ones were from the first 2 biomes that I couldn't reach earlier due to not having unlocked the skills needed to reach them. So I found and entered them, and at this point I had nailed down the game's mechanics. I made short work of both of them and unlocked the trophy. The next trophy was the War Within, which was for reaching maximum corruption level and surviving. I decided to do this on Shattered Descent biome, as I felt it would be the most straightforward to achieve here. Spoilers, you'll be seeing this area a lot towards the end of the video. I used the shield to absorb the enemy's yellow projectiles until I reached maximum corruption. I made sure not to use any power attacks and sped around the level until I reached the boss. I defeated the boss without lowering my corruption level while making sure to dodge his attacks given that I had very little health remaining. I popped the trophy afterwards. Next up was dispatching 30 enemies using the overdrive in a single cycle. I decided to start from the first area and keep going through the game until I had charged and used the overdrive enough times that I had fulfilled the requirements. And sure enough, that's what happened. It was pretty straightforward. I decided to try and take out the next true trophies at once, those being the Vincible and Untouchable trophies. The former was making it through a biome without using a shield. The latter was for beating a biome without taking any damage. Once again, I went to the Shattered Descent to do this. At this point, I had this area memorized down to a T, so I sped around this level without any issues. The only major obstacle was the boss at the end. Luckily, it went very well, and I was able to beat him without taking any damage. At this point, I'd beaten him so many times that I had all of his attacks memorized, so once I defeated the boss, I hopped down the ledge and those 2 trophies were in the bag. The penultimate trophy was my least favourite one in the game, which was the Fall from Grace trophy. This was for defeating an enemy using the environment without shooting it. What it meant was that I had to parry an enemy's attack back at it while it was flying over an empty hole. Conceptually, it's pretty straightforward. However, it is quite tedious. This was due to the fact that when I tried this, the enemy would often remain stunned in the mid-air instead of falling, and it turned out that I wasn't the only player that experienced this issue. After about 20 minutes of trying, I was able to get an enemy in a position for the trophy. This time I'd used an environmental attack to dispatch an enemy, which actually worked this time, and I popped a trophy as a result. The final trophy was the one I had mentioned earlier in the Garkozan Cartographer trophy. After wrapping everything else up, I checked the counter to see how progress was and saw that I had only completed 8 out of the required 33. I knew that the quickest way to up the counter was to speedrun the Shattered Descent over and over again, as a good run could be done in about 4 minutes. Even with that in mind, I estimated that it would take a couple of hours of doing this constantly to obtain the trophy. However, I knew that I'd come too far to stop now, so I knuckled down and got to work. After an hour and a half of constant grinding, I was finally on the last run, and the end was in sight. Unlike other games, there wasn't any twist at the end that stopped me. I beat the boss one final time, the final trophy popped, the platinum popped, and my journey was over. After 28 hours, is Saros' platinum worth it? How do I put this? I liked Saros, however I didn't love it. The gameplay is fun, but does get very tedious when pursuing the post-game trophies. If you're just beating the story, it's quite a blast actually. However, I found the story itself to be just fine, nothing special. I also found the price of the game to be too much for what it was, considering what it actually offers. If you do decide to purchase this game, wait for a sale. And if you're considering going for the platinum, I would say there's nothing wrong with doing that if you feel motivated enough. And it's definitely a more comfortable platinum journey compared to Returnal, that's for sure. Anyway, thanks for watching, you absolute legends, and good luck on your gaming journey. Be sure to like and subscribe.